Luke had always known his mother, Mrs. Helen, was a strong woman. From a young age, he watched her tirelessly work both at home and as a seamstress, ensuring he never lacked anything. However, to young Luke, it seemed like a normal part of life, something every mother did. He had no idea how deep her sacrifices ran. At 25, Luke was starting his career as a civil engineer. He had graduated with honors, something his mother proudly boasted about to her friends and neighbors. Mrs. Helen always highlighted how dedicated Luke had been to his studies and how he deserved every good thing life had to offer. What Luke didn't know was that much of his path had been paved by his mother's silent sacrifices. One day, while going through old documents stored in the small office Helen kept at home, Luke found a series of receipts and letters he had never seen before. They were neatly organized in a folder, as if part of a secret treasure. As he flipped through the papers, he came across paid-off debts and thank-you notes from people his mother had lent money to or helped in other ways. But what struck him most were loan contracts his mother had taken out to pay for his college, something she had never mentioned. Luke had always believed his scholarship covered all his college expenses, but as it turned out, that wasn't quite true. The documents clearly showed that Mrs. Helen had made significant financial sacrifices to ensure he lived comfortably during his years of study, all without him knowing. Shocked, he sat down on the small living room sofa, his hands trembling slightly. The bills, the amounts, the interest. It all swirled in his mind as the image of his mother, always smiling and offering words of support, became clearer. How had he never noticed? How had he missed the exhaustion in her eyes, the sacrifices hidden behind every encouraging word? That night, Luke couldn't sleep. His heart was heavy, as if he had uncovered a truth that changed everything he knew about his life. He recalled the times when his mother chose not to buy new clothes or made excuses to skip dinners or trips, always saying it wasn't necessary or that she had other priorities. In reality, it was all part of a plan she had crafted to ensure Luke had the best opportunities possible. In the following days, Luke observed his mother with new eyes. Mrs. Helen, with her simple gestures and welcoming smile, seemed even stronger now. She still worked in the small sewing workshop she had set up in their living room, taking on orders from neighbors and friends, even though her hair was turning gray and her body was more fragile. Luke's heart swelled with gratitude, but also with an overwhelming need to do something for her. He knew he couldn't just thank her with words, as if a simple "thank you" would be enough to repay everything she had done. He needed to find a way to show her that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every penny saved had been worth it. And so, Luke decided his life would take a different path. He would work harder, dedicate himself more, and do whatever it took to ensure his mother could live her remaining years without worries, without debts, and with the comfort she deserved. He wanted to give his mother a life of peace and tranquility, something she had denied herself for so long in his favor. Over the next few days, Luke began to plan in secret. He knew his mother would never accept direct help. Mrs. Helen was far too proud to admit she needed anything, and Luke didn't want to hurt that pride he so admired. But he had a plan, and he would carry it out carefully to ensure his mother was rewarded without realizing it was all being done for her. Luke knew it would be a long journey, and it wouldn't be easy to repay his mother for everything she had sacrificed. But to him, the most important thing was for her to know that he valued every effort, every small gesture of love she had given him over the years. That night, for the first time in weeks, Luke slept with a peaceful heart. He had a mission, and he was determined to see it through. To him, the real reward would be seeing his mother happy, living a life without worries, and knowing that all the love she had poured into him had not been in vain. With his decision made, Luke quietly began working on his plan. He knew that his mother wouldn't accept grand gestures all at once, so he decided that the best way to reward her was through small but meaningful changes in her life. The first step was to pay off all the debts his mother still carried, something she never mentioned, but that he knew weighed invisibly on her shoulders. Luke started working extra hours at his company, taking on more challenging projects to increase his income. He also began saving rigorously, cutting back on unnecessary expenses and directing everything he could toward the secret fund he had created with the goal of easing his mother's financial burdens. It was a small sacrifice compared to everything Helen had done for him, and Luke felt more and more motivated to do whatever it took to bring relief to the woman who had always been so strong. One day, while reviewing his financial plans, Luke realized that the amount he had saved was already substantial enough to pay off a large portion of his mother's debts. However, he knew he couldn't just pay everything off at once without her noticing. That would make her question where the money came from, and Helen was too stubborn to accept direct help. Luke would have to be careful. Through contacts he had made at his company, Luke met a trusted financial advisor who agreed to help him with his plan. The advisor suggested that Luke make the payments gradually, as if they were part of some benefit his mother was receiving from a promotion or a work opportunity, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion. This way, he could pay off the debts without her realizing that the money was coming directly from him. With the plan in action, Luke dedicated himself even more to his work, not just to help his mother, but also to advance in his own career. He knew that the more he progressed, the better his chances of providing an even better life for Helen. Months passed, and his mother's debts began to disappear little by little. With each new payment made, Luke felt a growing sense of relief. He knew he was on the right path, but he also knew there was still much to be done. Meanwhile, Helen continued her daily routine. She worked in her small sewing workshop, which she had set up in their living room, and though she seemed more and more tired, she never complained. Luke watched the signs of aging in his mother with a mixture of concern and affection. She was still that strong, determined woman, but he could see that years of hard work and sacrifice were taking their toll. One day, while the two of them were having lunch together on a Sunday, Helen mentioned, almost offhandedly, that some of her debts had mysteriously been paid off. "I don't know what's going on," she said with a shy smile. "Suddenly, some of the bills I thought would take years to pay off have just disappeared. It's like a miracle." Luke, with his heart racing, did his best to hide his emotions. "Maybe it's some kind of adjustment or financial aid program," he suggested, trying to sound casual. "You might have been selected for a benefit and didn't know about it." Helen laughed, amused by her unexpected good fortune. Luke, for his part, felt a surge of pride seeing that his plan was working. He was managing to help his mother without her noticing, just as he had intended. As time passed and Helen's debts continued to vanish, Luke began thinking about the next step. He wanted his mother to stop working so hard. Helen's dream had always been to travel and see new places, but she had never had the opportunity to fulfill that wish. There was always something more important to take care of, some bill to pay, some responsibility to fulfill. Luke decided that his next gift to her would be to make that dream come true. Luke was excited about the progress of his plans. He had already managed to pay off most of his mother's debts without her noticing, but he knew that the next step would require more than just careful financial planning. Organizing a trip for his mother, something she had never experienced, would be a gift she would never forget. The challenge, however, would be convincing her that this trip was a reward for her own hard work. He spent weeks researching destinations. He knew that Helen always spoke fondly about the coast, often mentioning her dream of seeing the ocean and feeling the sea breeze on her face, something she had never experienced. Luke decided that the perfect gift would be to give her that experience. After looking through vacation packages, he finally found the perfect one. A week-long trip to a seaside resort, a quiet place where his mother could relax and disconnect from work. To ensure that Helen would accept the gift, Luke came up with a story to explain the trip. He spoke to one of his colleagues, who had experience in marketing, and together they created the perfect plan. An exclusive promotion where the best seamstresses in the city would receive a prize for excellence. And who would be the first recipient? Mrs. Helen, of course. With everything prepared, Luke scheduled a meeting with his mother on a Saturday afternoon where he would pretend to be a representative from a local artisan association. He even created a certificate to present to her, complete with fake seals, to make everything look as official as possible. On the appointed day, Helen was confused, but flattered to be invited to a formal meeting. When Luke, disguised with glasses and using a serious tone of voice, handed her the certificate and announced the trip, she was speechless. Helen, who rarely received public recognition for her work, was deeply moved. The idea of a trip to the coast, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible, seemed surreal. "But why?" she asked, still incredulous. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "You've done more than you realize, Mrs. Helen," Luke replied, maintaining his disguise. "Your dedication and hard work have been recognized, and this trip is a way to thank you for everything you've done for the community." Helen tried to refuse the gift, saying it was too much and that she didn't deserve such an honor. But Luke, sticking to his carefully crafted story, insisted. "It's a prize, Mrs. Helen. There's nothing you need to pay or do. It's an honor for us to provide this experience for someone as dedicated as you." Helen's resistance lasted only a few minutes, but the idea that the trip was a reward for her own merit eventually convinced her. She accepted the gift, still in disbelief, but with a smile that Luke hadn't seen in a long time. Seeing his mother so happy filled his heart with satisfaction. The plan had worked. In the days that followed, Helen eagerly prepared for the trip. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream without guilt. Luke, on the other hand, worked behind the scenes, fine-tuning the final details and making sure everything was perfect. He made arrangements for his mother to be treated with the utmost respect at the resort, and ensured she would have access to the best services. The week of the trip finally arrived. Luke took Helen to the airport, helping her with her luggage and explaining the procedures, as she had never flown before. As the plane took off, Luke felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He knew that this experience was only the beginning of what he wanted to give his mother. While Helen enjoyed her time at the coast, Luke didn't stop working. Now that the debts were under control and his mother was beginning to experience new things, he started thinking about how to improve her life even further. He wanted to ensure that when she returned, she wouldn't need to work so hard anymore. Helen's lifelong dream had been to travel and see new places, but there was always something more important to attend to. Now, Luke was determined to make sure she never had to put off her dreams again. That's when he came up with his next idea, to renovate their home. The house where they lived was simple and cozy, but it was showing signs of wear. The walls needed painting, the roof required repairs, and the kitchen, where his mother spent so much time, deserved an upgrade. Luke knew that this would bring more comfort to Helen, and he decided to start the renovations while she was away. During the days Helen was enjoying her trip, Luke got to work. He hired a team of painters and began repairing the most worn-out parts of the house. He made improvements to the kitchen, replacing old appliances and modernizing the space without losing the homey charm that Helen loved. When she returned, she wouldn't just have wonderful memories of her vacation, but also a freshly renovated home, ready to be her sanctuary. Luke knew this was just the beginning. His mother had sacrificed so much for him, and he was determined to repay every one of those sacrifices. And as he watched the renovations progress, he began to plan his next step, ensuring his mother could finally retire and live without any financial worries. He would do whatever it took to make that happen. Helen's trip to the coast was a huge success. She spent an entire week immersed in experiences she had never imagined. Long walks on the beach, the cool ocean water, and lazy afternoons in the hammock at the resort. For the first time in years, Helen was able to relax without worrying about bills or deadlines. Luke knew this week represented the much-needed rest his mother deserved, and he was eagerly awaiting the chance to show her the next surprise. While she enjoyed her vacation, Luke closely supervised the home renovations. He wanted everything to be perfect, ensuring that every detail reflected the care and love his mother had always put into their home. Though simple, Helen's house was filled with memories, and Luke knew she would never want anything too extravagant. So he decided to keep the cozy feel of the space, but added improvements that would make her daily life easier and more comfortable. The kitchen was the main focus of the renovation. Luke knew Helen spent hours there, preparing meals with love, both for him and for their friends and neighbors. He installed a new, modern, and efficient stove and replaced the old, worn-out cabinets. The sink, now larger and more practical, made her work easier. Luke made sure to choose elegant yet functional finishes, making the kitchen both beautiful and practical. In addition to the kitchen, other upgrades were made throughout the house. The walls, once faded and worn by time, received a fresh coat of paint, bringing new life to the space. The roof, which had suffered from leaks during the last rains, was fully repaired. Luke also installed new lighting in the living room, creating a more welcoming atmosphere and brightening the corners his mother always said were too dark. The final touch was a brand new, soft, and comfortable armchair that Luke knew his mother would love. She had always dreamed of having a little corner just for herself, where she could sit in the evenings and read her treasured storybooks, the ones she had kept so carefully since Luke was a child. Now, she would finally have that space. When Helen returned from her trip, Luke made sure to give her a warm welcome. He picked her up from the airport, listening attentively as she shared stories from her vacation. His mother was glowing. Every detail, from the taste of the food to the beauty of the sea, seemed to have rejuvenated her. "It was the most incredible week of my life," Helen said with a wide smile. "I never thought I could experience something like that. It felt like a dream." "You deserve much more, Mom," Luke replied, trying to hide his excitement for the surprise that awaited her at home. As they arrived at the house, Helen immediately sensed something different. She looked around, noticing the freshly painted walls, the new lighting, and the scent of a newly renovated home. Her eyes filled with tears when she reached the kitchen, where everything was new, shiny, and perfectly organized. Luke watched in silence, waiting for her reaction. "Luke, what is all this?" Helen asked, still in shock. "Did you do all this while I was away?" "It's a small gift, Mom. I wanted you to come home to more comfort. You've done so much for me. I thought it was time to give something back." Helen couldn't hold back her tears. Every corner of the house reflected Luke's love and care, and she knew that it wasn't just a physical renovation, but a profound expression of love. She embraced her son tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. Even though she had never asked for anything, Luke had understood exactly what she needed, even better than she had. "I don't know how to thank you, my son," Helen said, emotional. "This is more than I could have ever imagined. There's no need to thank me, Mom. Everything I am today is because of you. I just want you to live well, to have peace, and not worry about anything anymore." The home renovation was an important milestone in Helen's life. She felt lighter, as if she could finally breathe freely, knowing that the weight of responsibilities was lifting. For the first time in many years, she began to consider the idea of slowing down, something she had never thought possible. In the days that followed, Helen relished every detail of her renewed home. The new kitchen inspired her to create new recipes, while her little reading corner with the armchair became her favorite retreat for reading and relaxing. Luke watched his mother with satisfaction, knowing that every effort had been worth it. However, he knew there was still more to be done. Although the house was renovated and the debts were paid, Helen's daily work still weighed heavily on her. She was a proud woman who believed that working was her duty, but Luke wanted her to finally rest. He began planning his next step, making sure his mother could retire and live with peace of mind, free from the daily demands of work. Luke knew that this would be the most challenging part of his plan. Convincing Helen to stop working would be difficult, but he was determined. He knew that with the same patience and strategy he had used so far, he would eventually show her that, after so many years of sacrifice, she deserved to enjoy life without worries. After the success of the home renovations and the vacation, Luke knew the next step would be more delicate. Convincing his mother to stop working would be a huge challenge. For as long as he could remember, Helen had always worked hard, believing it was her duty. Luke, on the other hand, wanted her to finally rest and enjoy a peaceful life. He needed to find the right way to approach the subject without hurting his mother's pride. In the weeks that followed, Luke discreetly observed Helen's routine. Even with the house renovated and the comfort he had provided, she still remained committed to her small sewing workshop, accepting orders from old and new clients alike. Luke knew that work was part of his mother's identity, but he could also see the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll that years of dedication had taken on her body. One Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch, Luke decided to broach the subject. Helen was in a particularly good mood, telling stories about her clients, and Luke felt it was the right moment to gently plant the idea. "Mom, have you ever thought about taking a longer vacation?" he asked casually, while refilling his glass of juice. Helen laughed and shook her head. "Vacation? If only. The orders just keep coming. If I stop, how will I manage to meet all my clients' needs?" Luke had anticipated this response. His mother had always put others before herself, but he was ready. "And what if you didn't have to work anymore?" he suggested, looking directly at her. "What if you could take some time just for yourself? Travel more, rest, do all the things you've always wanted to do." Helen fell silent for a moment, surprised by the suggestion. She laughed, slightly uncomfortable, as if the idea was too absurd to be taken seriously. "Luke, my son, I love working. Besides, who would do this for me? I wouldn't know what to do without my work. It's what keeps me going." "I understand, Mom, but I think you've already done more than enough. You've worked so hard your entire life. Don't you think it's time to enjoy more of the good things? To do the things you've always dreamed of, without worrying about deadlines and orders?" Helen looked at Luke, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, but then shook her head. "I don't know, Luke. I'm not sure I'm ready to stop. What would I do with all that free time?" Luke smiled, having anticipated this reaction. "You could finally do the things you've always wanted but never had time for. Travel, read your books, rest. You've always said you wanted to visit the town where your parents were born but never got the chance. Why not make it happen now?" The idea sounded good, but Helen was still hesitant. She had spent her entire life working, and the idea of stopping felt daunting. There was a conflict in her heart. On the one hand, she knew her body was asking for rest. On the other hand, work had become part of who she was, and the thought of giving it up made her feel uncertain. That night, after dinner, Helen remained thoughtful. Luke's words echoed in her mind. Could he be right? Was it truly time to stop and think more about herself? She had never allowed herself that kind of reflection before. Working had always been her way of contributing, of taking care of Luke and herself. But now, he was the one taking care of her. And for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, it was time to accept that. The following week, Luke took the initiative. Without telling his mother, he consulted a retirement planning specialist. He wanted to understand how to ensure his mother could live comfortably, without financial worries. With the financial support he was already providing and the retirement savings she had accumulated, Luke realized that everything was ready. Helen could stop working without any concerns about the future. The next Sunday, Luke brought up the subject again, this time more firmly. "Mom, I spoke with a retirement specialist. We did some calculations, and if you want, you can stop working right now. You don't have to worry about money. Everything is taken care of. You could live without any financial concerns from now on." Helen was shocked. The idea of retiring, something that had always seemed distant and unrealistic, was now being presented to her as a concrete possibility. She looked at Luke, trying to grasp the full weight of what he was saying. "Luke, I don't know what to say. This is something I never thought would be possible, but Helen hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision. Luke took his mother's hand, smiling gently. "Mom, you've done everything for me your whole life. Now it's my turn to take care of you. You don't have to decide right now, but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, everything is set. You deserve this rest." Helen smiled, touched by her son's words. Although there were still doubts in her heart, for the first time she felt that perhaps it was possible. After so many years of sacrifice, maybe she could finally rest. The days following the conversation about retirement were filled with reflection. Helen, who had lived a life of hard work and sacrifice, now found herself facing a decision she had never thought possible. Her body was growing more tired, but her heart was still deeply connected to the work she did. Stopping now seemed like a challenge, almost like giving up a part of her identity. Luke, on the other hand, was patient, giving his mother space to process the idea. He knew that he couldn't push her to make such a significant decision overnight. But he also didn't give up on his plan. He was determined to show her that retirement wasn't the end of her contribution to the world, but rather the beginning of a new phase. A phase where she could finally do the things she had always dreamed of without the constant worries that had once held her back. One morning, while they were having breakfast together, Helen brought up the subject unexpectedly. "You know, Luke, I've been thinking about what you said, about stopping work, and maybe I am ready for that. Not because I don't love what I do, but because for the first time, I feel like I've done enough." Luke looked at her, surprised and excited. "Do you really think you're ready, Mom?" Helen smiled, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Yes, I think so. But at the same time, it scares me. I don't know what to expect. Working has always been such a big part of my life. I'm afraid I won't know how to live without it." "That's perfectly normal, Mom," Luke said, reassuring her. "It's a change, yes, but it's a good change. And you're not going to lose your purpose. You'll finally be able to focus on yourself, on the things you've always wanted to do but never had time for. And I'll be here, by your side, helping you through this process." The idea of retirement was starting to make sense to Helen. And with Luke's support, she felt that perhaps, for the first time, she could allow herself to rest. In the days that followed, she began to slow down. She informed her closest clients that she would soon stop taking orders and gradually started closing her sewing workshop. Helen had expected the transition to be difficult, but to her surprise, a feeling of freedom began to bloom. Luke, meanwhile, was planning his next big surprise for his mother. He knew that the process of adjusting to retirement would be delicate, but he wanted to make sure this new phase of her life would begin with something special. He remembered a dream his mother had always spoken about, visiting the town where her parents were born. For years, Helen had talked nostalgically about the stories she had heard from her mother about the place, but she had never had the chance to visit. Luke decided that this was the perfect opportunity to make that dream come true. He began planning the trip in secret, just as he had done with the home renovation. He researched everything he could about the town, from the landscapes to the historical sites that her grandparents might have frequented. Luke wanted Helen not only to visit the place, but to reconnect with her roots, something that always moved her when she talked about the past. When everything was ready, Luke revealed the surprise to his mother. "Mom, I have something else to tell you," he said with a smile. "Another surprise, Luke?" Helen responded, laughing. "What are you up to this time?" "Well, now that you've decided to retire, I thought it was the perfect time to make one of your dreams come true." Helen looked at him, curious, as Luke handed her a folder with all the details of the trip he had planned. "You've always wanted to visit the town where your parents were born. Now you'll get to do that. Everything is set. We'll go together." Helen opened the folder, and when she saw the details of the trip, her eyes filled with tears. She had always imagined this visit, but had never thought it would actually happen. "Luke, it's more than I deserve. I don't even know what to say," she said, emotional. "You deserve this and so much more, Mom. This is just the beginning of what I want to do for you. Now you can really enjoy life without any worries. We're going to take this trip together and learn more about our family's history." In the days leading up to the trip, Helen allowed herself to dream again. Now that her sewing workshop was closed and her responsibilities were easing, she began preparing for the journey of reconnecting with her roots. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of obligations on her shoulders. Instead, there was a sense of lightness and anticipation for something new and beautiful. When the day of the trip finally arrived, Luke and Helen boarded the plane with hearts full of excitement. For Helen, this journey wasn't just about visiting a new place, but rediscovering who she was and everything her family's legacy meant. And for Luke, it was another way to show his mother how much he appreciated every sacrifice she had made. The flight was smooth, but filled with anticipation. Helen sat beside Luke, gazing out the window as the plane descended over the town where her parents were born. A mix of emotions flooded her: nostalgia, longing for stories she had heard countless times, and a sense of curiosity about what it would be like to stand in the place that had only existed in her imagination. Upon landing, Luke and Helen rented a car to drive to the hotel Luke had chosen, a cozy place near the historic center where the town's rich history was well preserved. When they arrived at the hotel, Luke couldn't hide his excitement. "Tomorrow we have a special outing planned. I know you'll love it, Mom, but tonight, I just want you to relax and take it all in." Helen smiled, touched by Luke's dedication to making this experience special. That night, as she rested at the hotel, she reflected on everything she had been through. Her whole life had been dedicated to work, to caring for Luke, and now, for the first time, she was being cared for. It was a bittersweet feeling. Part of her still wanted to be in control, but it was also comforting to let Luke guide her through this new phase. The next morning, Luke took his mother on a tour of the historic center. They walked along cobblestone streets, passing old houses and monuments that told the story of the town. Helen was mesmerized. The town was small but rich in detail and memory. They visited a square that, according to family stories, was where Helen's parents used to meet in the evenings. It was as if the past was unfolding before her eyes, and the emotion was palpable. As they strolled through the town, Luke held his mother's hand, sensing how much this trip meant to her. Helen paused in front of an old church, the very church where her grandparents had been married. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. It was as if all the stories from her childhood had come to life, and she could physically and emotionally touch her roots. "I never thought I'd live to see this moment," Helen said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's like everything I've heard my whole life is materializing right in front of me." Luke, moved by her words, hugged her tightly. "This is your legacy, Mom. Our family's history is here, and now it's part of ours, too." In the following days, Luke and Helen continued exploring the town. Every corner brought back memories from the stories Helen had heard as a child, and she felt more connected to her roots than ever before. They visited museums, old mansions, and even spoke with some older residents who still remembered the days when Helen's parents lived in the town. The trip was a true rediscovery of who Helen was, and Luke couldn't have been happier to give her this experience. One night, during dinner at a small local restaurant, Helen began talking about the future, something she rarely did. "You know, Luke, for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to imagine what I'll do next. Before, it was always just work, and more work. Now I see so many possibilities. I think I'd like to go back to school, maybe study something that inspires me in a new way. Perhaps art or literature?" Luke was pleasantly surprised and thrilled. Seeing his mother begin to dream again, after so many years of sacrifice, was exactly what he had hoped for. It was proof that she was allowing herself to live more freely and with fresh perspectives. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Mom. You're so creative and smart. I'm sure you'll love diving into something new." The trip wasn't just an opportunity to connect Helen with her roots. It also opened the door to a new beginning. When they returned to the hotel that night, Luke gave his mother a small gift. It was a simple yet elegant leather journal. "I want you to use this to jot down your ideas, your dreams, your new plans," he said with a smile. "This is just the start of a new chapter, Mom, and I want you to document it all." Helen held the journal close. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. For the first time, she felt free to imagine a future not tied to work, but to the things she had always wanted to do. And now, with Luke by her side, she knew she could make those dreams come true. In the last days of the trip, they visited the farm where her grandparents had lived, now turned into a guest house. Helen walked through the fields, touching the trees her parents must have known, feeling the wind that seemed to carry the stories of her childhood. The journey was coming full circle, but at the same time, a new chapter was beginning. Back at the hotel on their last night before returning home, Luke asked his mother how she was feeling. "I feel at peace, Luke. I think for the first time in many years, I feel complete, and it's all thanks to you." Luke smiled, touched by her words. "I'm just repaying a small part of everything you've done for me, Mom. This is only the beginning." As they prepared to head home, Helen knew her life had been forever changed. The memories of the town where her parents had been born were now a part of her personal journey. And with Luke's unwavering support, she knew the future still held many more beautiful surprises. Back in the town where they lived, Helen's life was no longer the same. The trip to her parents' birthplace had transformed her, and with retirement finally accepted in her heart, she began to see the world through new eyes. For the first time in decades, her routine was no longer dictated by deadlines, commitments, or orders. It was as if she was rediscovering life, but now from a completely different perspective. Luke, watching his mother with affection, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew he had accomplished his mission of giving her not only a more peaceful life, but also of returning something time had taken away: the pleasure of dreaming. Helen, who had always prioritized others and dedicated herself to work, now had space to think about her own desires. In the first days after the trip, Helen spent time reorganizing her house. She packed away the sewing machines, delivered her last orders, and with that, she closed a chapter of her life. The leather journal that Luke had given her was slowly being filled with ideas. She wrote down thoughts, plans, and even little dreams she hadn't dared to express before. She was discovering a new way to live, where work was no longer the center of everything. One morning, while they were having breakfast together, Helen shared an idea that had been exciting her for the past few days. "You know, Luke, I've been thinking about going back to school. Nothing too complicated, maybe a course in art or literature. I've always loved reading, and I think it would be a nice way to keep myself engaged, but in a different way." Luke smiled, thrilled to see his mother considering something that brought her joy. "I think that's an amazing idea, Mom. You've always been so creative and smart. I'm sure you'll love dedicating yourself to something like that." This new phase of Helen's life began to take shape slowly. She found a local literature course and signed up. The classes, held twice a week, became a source of joy for her. Helen, who had always been somewhat reserved, began to make new friends in the class, and for the first time in many years, she felt like she belonged to something that was entirely hers. It wasn't about work or caring for others. It was a space where she could grow and learn purely for the pleasure of it. Luke continued to support his mother at every step. He knew the process of transformation wasn't easy, but he also understood that it was necessary. Helen was finally allowing herself to live a lighter life, where her choices were based on her own desires rather than obligations. Over time, Helen started thinking about new trips. Now that she had discovered the joy of exploring the world, her desire to visit new places only grew. She and Luke began planning another adventure, this time to a historic city she had always wanted to see. Luke was excited at the thought of continuing to give his mother these experiences, knowing that each new memory made her feel even more fulfilled. One day, while flipping through her journal, Helen realized something. The journal, which had started with timid ideas and long-held dreams, was now full of plans, desires, and projects she intended to pursue. The simple act of writing down her thoughts had given her a fresh perspective on life. She no longer saw herself as just a retired woman, but as someone who still had so much to explore, learn, and live. In that moment, she realized life had offered her a new opportunity, a chance to reconnect with her desires and rediscover herself as a person. And she knew this change had been sparked by Luke, who had awakened something within her. One afternoon, as they were walking through the park together, Helen looked at her son with gratitude. "Luke, you've changed my life. I never imagined I'd be where I am today with so many possibilities ahead of me. And it's all because of you." Luke smiled, touched by his mother's words. "Mom, I just did what was right. You spent your whole life sacrificing for me and for our family. Now it's my turn to take care of you, to help you live the way you deserve." Helen held Luke's hand, feeling stronger than ever. She knew that, despite everything she had been through, the future still had many surprises in store for her. And now, with the certainty that she could count on her son's unwavering support, she was ready to face each new stage with courage and determination. That night, back at home, Helen sat in her new favorite armchair, the journal in her hands. Outside, the moon shone brightly in the sky, casting a soft glow over the room where she had once felt overwhelmed by life's responsibilities. Now, sitting there with her heart light and her mind full of new ideas, Helen felt that the cycle of her life had come full circle. More importantly, she knew she was ready to start a new chapter. Across the room, Luke watched his mother with pride. He knew that this journey of transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every effort. Helen was finally living the life she deserved, and as her son, he was determined to stand by her side every step of the way. And so mother and son, together, continued writing new stories, stories of gratitude, love, and discovery. Because in the end, it wasn't the past that mattered, but the future they were creating together, one day at a time.